This is Wild HOA Situations. I saved every receipt and every timestamp. I was standing in my side yard holding a level when Amy pointed at the gate latch and screamed that it was a safety hazard and she would force a replacement. "I am here to protect the community," she shouted, her face red, a plastic ruler clutched in her hand like a weapon. The post-hole digger leaned against a pile of fresh dirt behind me, and two neighbors across the street had stopped to stare. Thunder rumbled in the distance, low and threatening, and I felt the first cold drop of rain hit my neck. I live in Fargo, North Dakota, in a neighborhood called Lakeview Crest, and the Design Review Association had turned my life into a nightmare over a fence I needed to sell my house. I am a gym manager with early morning open shifts, and the last thing I needed was Amy Turner, the social committee chair who spread rumors faster than a group chat, standing in my yard at 6 p.m. yelling about code violations that did not exist. She wore a gray windbreaker with the hood pushed back despite the weather turning, and her sleek low ponytail swung as she gestured wildly at the gate I had just installed with a licensed contractor. "The latch is fine," I said, keeping my voice calm. "The inspector signed off this morning." She stepped closer, holding up that plastic ruler like it was a courtroom exhibit. "I measure fence gaps like a scientist," she said, her tone dripping with smugness. "This latch protrudes 3/8 of an inch past the acceptable clearance. I will bury you in notices until you run out of printer ink." I had bought the house 2 years ago because the mortgage was affordable and the commute to the gym was under 10 minutes. The HOA seemed normal at first, the kind of place where people complained about trash cans left out too long but nothing serious. Then I got engaged, my fiancée wanted to move closer to her family in Minneapolis, and we put the house on the market. The buyers wanted a privacy fence before closing, a reasonable request in a neighborhood where backyards opened onto a busy walking path. I hired a contractor, pulled the permit from the city, submitted my application to the Lakeview Crest Design Review Association, and waited for approval. That was 4 months ago. The HOA had rejected my application 3 times. The first rejection said the fence height exceeded guidelines by 2 inches, even though I had submitted plans for a 6-foot fence and the guidelines allowed 6 feet. The second rejection claimed the color was not pre-approved, despite the fact that natural cedar was listed as an acceptable finish in the rulebook. The third rejection arrived the day after I resubmitted with a surveyor's drawing, showing the fence sat 2 inches inside my property line, well within the setback requirement. The rejection notice said the survey was incomplete because it did not include elevation data, which was never mentioned in the application requirements. Amy had been copied on every rejection email, and each time she added a paragraph of her own. She claimed neighbors had expressed concern. She said the design review board needed time to evaluate visual impact. She warned me that construction without approval would result in immediate fines and forced removal. I waited anyway, thinking the city permit and the surveyor's stamp would be enough to prove I was right. Then the buyer's financing deadline started closing in, and I made the call to start construction. The contractor showed up on a Tuesday morning with a truck full of posts and panels. We had the first section framed by noon. Amy appeared at 1:15 with a clipboard, a tape measure, and that plastic ruler. She took photos of every post, every string line, every chalk mark on the grass. She told the contractor he was trespassing on HOA common property, which was a lie because the survey clearly showed my lot line. The contractor, a patient man in his 50s who had been doing this for 30 years, asked her to leave. She refused. He called me at the gym, and I drove home to find her standing in the middle of my yard with her phone out, recording video and narrating a list of imaginary safety hazards. "That latch," she said now, jabbing the ruler toward the gate, "will snag a child's jacket and cause injury. I have documented this. The board will issue a stop work order tomorrow, and you will be fined $200 per day until you replace it with an approved model." I pulled my phone out and opened the camera app. Show me where in the rulebook it says latch clearance is regulated. Her smile tightened. The Design Review Board has discretion to interpret safety standards. So you are making this up. I am enforcing community standards, she snapped. I will make an example out of you so everyone learns. I took a photo of her holding the ruler against the latch, then another of the gate fully open with 6 inches of clearance on every side. The contractor had installed it perfectly. The latch was recessed, the swing was smooth, and the city inspector had signed off with 0 notes. But Amy did not care about facts. She cared about control, and I had committed the unforgivable sin of moving forward without waiting for her permission. The next morning I found an envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a violation notice on Lakeview Crest letterhead, printed on thick cream paper with the association logo embossed at the top. The notice claimed I had installed a non-conforming gate latch, erected a fence without final design approval, and created a safety hazard by leaving construction materials in the yard overnight. The fine was $200 per day starting immediately, with penalties doubling after 7 days. A handwritten note at the bottom in Amy's looping script said the board would meet in 2 weeks to discuss forced removal. I called the contractor and asked him to pause work until I sorted it out. He apologized and said he could not afford to keep coming back if the HOA was going to shut him down every day. I understood. He had other jobs, other clients who were not being harassed by a social committee chair with a ruler fetish. I paid him for the work completed and told him I would call when it was safe to finish. Then I started gathering evidence. I work early mornings at the gym, opening the doors at 5 and staying until the lunch crowd thins out around 1. That gave me afternoons to dig into HOA records, city permits, and property documents. I requested a copy of the design review guidelines from the Association Management Company, a regional firm based in Fargo that handled a dozen neighborhoods. The guidelines arrived by email 2 days later. A 43-page PDF that mentioned fence height, materials, and setback requirements but said nothing about latch clearance, nothing about elevation surveys, and nothing about overnight construction materials. I printed the whole thing and highlighted every relevant section. Then I went to the city clerk's office and requested a copy of my building permit, the inspector's sign-off, and the survey I had paid $1,500 for. A clerk named Donna, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain, asked why I needed certified copies. I explained the HOA situation, and she nodded like she had heard it before. They try this all the time, she said. The city permit supersedes the HOA on safety issues. If the inspector signed off, the latch is legal. Can you put that in writing? She printed a 1-page letter on city letterhead explaining the permit process and the inspector's authority. I am a city clerk who explains which documents are public record, she said with a wry smile. This one is public, and you can use it however you need. I thanked her and walked out with a folder full of proof. But I knew Amy would not care. She had already decided I was guilty and the board would back her because she was louder, more persistent, and willing to weaponize the rulebook in ways that would make a lawyer cringe. I needed something bigger, something that would force the association to drop the case before it turned into a legal nightmare that killed my sale. That is when I remembered the incident from last summer. Amy had a history of showing up on people's property uninvited. In July, a neighbor 2 streets over had hired a landscaper to remove a dying tree near the property line. Amy appeared halfway through the job, claimed the tree was on HOA common land, and demanded the crew stop immediately. The neighbor, a retired school teacher named Greg, told her the survey showed the tree was on his lot. Amy insisted the survey was wrong and threatened to call the police if the crew did not leave. Greg called the police first. The officer who responded took statements, reviewed the survey, and told Amy she was trespassing and interfering with legal work. Greg filed a report, and the officer issued a warning. I had heard about it through the neighborhood gossip chain, but I did not know if there was an official record. I called the non-emergency line and explained the situation. The dispatcher put me through to the records department, and I requested any incident reports involving Amy Turner or the Lakeview Crest HOA from the past year. 3 days later, I received a packet of 4 reports. One was the tree incident. Another was a noise complaint Amy had filed against a contractor installing a deck. The third was a dispute over trash cans. The fourth was a trespassing complaint filed by a homeowner who said Amy had entered his backyard without permission to photograph a shed. I nodded like I accepted it, because I wanted her comfortable and careless. The pattern was clear. Amy used her position on the social committee to intimidate homeowners, twist the rules, and manufacture violations that did not exist. She trespassed, recorded video without consent, and filed complaints that wasted city resources. The police had warned her twice, and the HOA had never addressed it. That was my trump card. If I could show the board and the management company that Amy's behavior was creating legal liability, they would have to back off. But I could not reveal it yet. Amy was escalating, and I needed her to keep digging her own grave. The fines started hitting my HOA account 3 days after the first notice. $200 per day, charged automatically through the management company's online portal. I logged in and saw the balance climbing. 600, 800, 1,000. I tried to upload a dispute letter with my evidence attached, but the portal crashed every time I hit submit. I called the management company and got a voicemail. I emailed and got an auto reply saying they would respond within 5 business days. Amy, meanwhile, was busy. She had submitted a complaint log entry to the board, a 5-page document that cataloged every alleged violation tied to my fence project. The log was written in her voice, full of phrases like egregious disregard for community standards and willful negligence. She claimed I had ignored multiple warnings, refused to cooperate with the design review process, and created a dangerous condition that threatened children and pets. She attached photos of the gate latch, the post hole digger leaning against the dirt pile, and the string lines stretched across my yard. She included timestamps, GPS coordinates, and a hand-drawn diagram that made my property look like a construction war zone. I received a copy of the log by email the same day the management company finally responded to my dispute. Their message was 2 sentences long: "Your dispute has been reviewed and denied. Fines will continue to accrue until the violation is corrected." No explanation. No reference to the evidence I had submitted. Just a denial and a promise that my bill would keep growing. The balance hit $2,000. I needed to force a confrontation, something public and documented where Amy's behavior would be impossible to ignore. I decided to attend the next board meeting and demand answers. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday night at 7, held in the clubhouse near the neighborhood entrance. I had never been to a meeting before, but I knew Amy would be there. She never missed a chance to perform. I arrived early and took a seat in the second row. Other homeowners trickled in, maybe 15 people total, most of them looking tired and annoyed. The board sat at a folding table up front: the president, a retired engineer named Harold, the treasurer, a quiet woman named Carla, and Amy, who had somehow positioned herself as the vice chair of the design review committee despite having no official training or authority. She spotted me immediately and smiled, the kind of smile that said she was looking forward to this. The meeting started with routine business, budget updates, landscaping bids, a complaint about dog waste stations. Then Harold moved to new business, and Amy raised her hand. "We have a serious safety issue I need to address," she said, standing and pulling out her plastic ruler like a prop. "A homeowner has installed a non-conforming fence with a dangerous gate latch, ignored multiple violations notices, and refused to cooperate with the design review process. I have documented everything, and I am recommending the board authorize forced removal and legal action to recover fines. She clicked a remote, and a projector screen lit up with photos of my yard. The images were zoomed in, cropped to make the gate latch look enormous, the post hole digger like a weapon, the dirt pile like a toxic waste dump. She walked through each photo with the ruler, pointing out measurements and clearances that meant nothing. I raised my hand. Harold nodded at me. "I would like to respond," I said, standing and holding up my folder. Amy cut me off before I could speak. "This is not a hearing," she said sharply. "The board will review the evidence and vote." "He has a right to speak," Harold said, looking uncomfortable. I opened the folder and pulled out the city letter, the highlighted guidelines, and the payment confirmations showing I had never been delinquent on HOA fees despite the recent fine blast. I explained the permit process, the inspector's approval, and the fact that the guidelines did not support any of Amy's claims. I kept my voice calm and factual, and I watched the other board members glance at each other with growing discomfort. Then Amy played her trump card. She pulled a printed email from her bag, waved it in the air, and said, "I have a signed complaint from a neighbor who witnessed unsafe construction practices and children playing near the equipment." That was a lie. I knew it was a lie because my nearest neighbors were a couple in their 70s who had told me they loved the fence, and the other side was a vacant rental property. But Amy said it with such confidence, such certainty, that Harold looked ready to believe her. If you want to see how this ends, hit that like button and subscribe for more wild HOA stories. I pulled out my phone and opened a voice memo app. "I am recording this," I said loudly. "For my records." Amy's face went pale. "You cannot record a board meeting without consent." "Actually, I can," I said. "North Dakota is a one-party consent state. And if you are going to accuse me of safety violations based on a fake witness, I want it on record." The room went silent. Harold cleared his throat and said they would table the vote until the next meeting so the board could review all the evidence. Amy started to argue, but Carla, the treasurer, cut her off and said it was the right call. The meeting adjourned 10 minutes later, and I walked out with my folder and my phone, knowing I had bought myself 2 more weeks. But the clock was ticking. The buyer's financing deadline was 3 weeks away, and the lender had started asking questions about the HOA dispute. My real estate agent called and said the buyers were getting nervous, and if the fence was not finished and approved by closing, the deal would fall apart. I was trying to sell the house, and the HOA was threatening disclosures and liens that would torpedo everything. I needed an ally who could testify, someone who had seen Amy's behavior firsthand and was willing to go on record. I thought of Greg, the neighbor with the tree incident. I found his number through the neighborhood directory and called him. He remembered me from a block party 2 summers ago and agreed to meet for coffee. Greg was in his 70s, soft-spoken and methodical, the kind of guy who kept receipts and took notes. He told me about the tree incident in detail, Amy showing up unannounced, demanding the crew stop, threatening police action, refusing to leave even after the officer told her she was wrong. He still had the incident report, the officer's card, and photos of Amy standing in his yard with her phone out. "She does this to everyone," he said. "She picks a target, makes up a violation, and then buries them in paperwork until they give up or move. The board knows, but they do not want to deal with it because she is loud and persistent and nobody wants the fight." "Will you testify at the next meeting?" I asked. He hesitated. "I am leaving town in 2 days for a family thing. I will be gone 3 weeks. But I can write a statement and email it to the board if that helps." "It helps," I said. "Thank you." Greg sent the statement that night. It was 2 pages, single-spaced, with dates, names, and references to the police report. He described Amy's pattern of trespassing, intimidation, and filing false complaints. He included the officer's name and badge number. He ended with a line that made me smile. The HOA is creating legal liability by allowing this behavior to continue, and I recommend an independent review of all enforcement actions taken under her authority. I forwarded the statement to the board, the management company, and my real estate attorney. Then I waited. The fines kept climbing. 3,000. 4,000. The management company sent an email saying they would file a lien if the balance was not paid within 30 days. My attorney said we could fight it, but litigation would take months and cost more than the fines. The buyers were getting cold feet. My fiancé was stressed. I was working double shifts at the gym to cover the growing bill, and every morning I woke up wondering if Amy had found some new way to make my life worse. Then the twist hit. I got a call from my homeowner's insurance carrier. A claims adjuster named Lisa said they had received multiple complaints tied to my property, all filed by the same person, all alleging unsafe conditions and potential liability. The complaints were vague but repetitive: fence construction creating hazards, contractor equipment left unsecured, dangerous gate mechanisms, children at risk. The carrier had flagged my account for review, and if the complaints continued, they would cancel my policy at renewal. Who filed the complaints? I asked. She could not say, but the name on the email signature was Amy Turner, Social Committee Chair, Lakeview Crest Design Review Association. I hung up and stared at the wall. Amy was not just trying to bury me in fines. She was trying to destroy my insurance, my sale, my ability to function as a homeowner. She was escalating faster than I had anticipated, and I realized I had underestimated how far she was willing to go. I called my attorney and told him about the insurance threat. He said it was harassment, possibly tortious interference, and definitely grounds for a counterclaim if the HOA tried to sue me. But he also said proving it would require depositions, discovery, and months of legal wrangling. I did not have months. I had 3 weeks until closing, and the buyer's agent was already asking if we should extend the deadline. I needed to end this now. The second board meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. I prepared a packet with every piece of evidence I had gathered: the city letter, the highlighted guidelines, the payment confirmations, Greg's statement, the police incident reports, and a new addition: a timeline showing Amy's escalating behavior over 6 months, cross-referenced with the complaints she had filed and the fines she had authorized. I made copies for every board member, the management company, and the HOA attorney. Then I added one more document: a letter from my insurance carrier confirming that Amy had filed multiple complaints and that my policy was under review as a result. I included a note from my attorney explaining that the HOA could be held liable for damages if the harassment continued and I lost the sale. I arrived at the meeting early again, this time with a friend from the gym who agreed to sit in the back and record video as a witness. The room filled up faster than the last meeting: 25 people instead of 15. Word had spread. Other homeowners were tired of Amy's tactics, and they wanted to see what would happen. Amy sat at the board table with a glove box envelope of certified slips in front of her, each one a receipt for a violation notice she had mailed. She looked calm, confident, ready to railroad the vote. Harold called the meeting to order and moved quickly through the agenda. Then he opened the floor for the fence dispute. Amy stood and launched into her presentation. She had a new slide deck, this one with aerial photos of the neighborhood, zoomed-in shots of my property, and a comparison chart showing how my fence supposedly violated setback rules. She talked for 10 minutes straight, her voice rising with each slide, her plastic ruler tapping the screen for emphasis. She ended with a demand: immediate forced removal, full reimbursement of fines, and a formal censure on my HOA record. Then she tried to cut my mic. I had requested speaking time in advance, following the rules in the bylaws. But when I stood to respond, Amy reached for the laptop controlling the sound system and clicked a button. My microphone went dead. The room erupted. People started shouting. Harold banged a gavel and told Amy to turn it back on. She refused, saying I had forfeited my right to speak by recording the last meeting without permission. That was a lie, and half the room knew it. Carla, the treasurer, stood up and said, "Turn it back on, Amy." Now. Amy's face flushed red, but she clicked the button. My mic came back to life and I started talking before she could interrupt again. I handed out the packets and walked the board through every piece of evidence. I showed the city letter proving the latch was legal. I showed the guidelines proving Amy had invented the violations. I showed the payment confirmations proving I was current on fees. I showed Greg's statement proving Amy had a history of trespassing and filing false complaints. I showed the police reports proving the city had warned her twice. Then I pulled out the insurance letter and the attorney's note. I explained that Amy's harassment was costing me my sale, my coverage, and thousands of dollars in fines for violations that did not exist. I looked directly at Harold and said, "The HOA is creating legal liability by allowing this to continue. And if you vote to uphold these fines, I will file a formal complaint with the management company and pursue damages in small claims court." The room went silent. Amy stood up, her face twisted with rage. "I will make an example out of you so everyone learns," she shouted. Someone in the back row laughed. Another person said, "You already tried that, Amy. It did not work." Harold called for a recess. The board huddled with the HOA attorney in a side room for 20 minutes. When they came back, Harold looked exhausted. He said the board had reviewed the evidence and determined that the violations were not supported by the guidelines. The fines would be reversed. The fence would be approved retroactively. The case was closed. Amy stood up so fast her chair tipped over. "You cannot do this," she said. I followed procedure. I documented everything. The attorney leaned over and whispered something in her ear. Her face went pale. She grabbed her glove box envelope and her plastic ruler and walked out without another word. The room watched her go and someone started clapping. Then everyone else joined in. The board vote was unanimous. The fines were reversed, all $4,000 wiped from my account. The fence was approved, and the contractor came back the next day to finish the job. The gate latch stayed exactly as it was, legal and functional, and the city inspector gave it a final sign-off with a note that said, "No issues found." Excellent work. But I was not done. I escalated the insurance complaints to a regional supervisor at the carrier and demanded a written correction removing the false claims from my file. The supervisor reviewed the timeline, confirmed that Amy had filed the complaints without evidence, and issued a letter stating that my policy was in good standing and the complaints were deemed unfounded. I forwarded that letter to the management company and requested a formal audit of all fines and enforcement actions tied to Amy's authority. The audit took 6 weeks. An independent reviewer went through 2 years of HOA records and found a pattern of improper charges, late fees applied incorrectly, and notices issued without proper board approval. Amy had been running her own enforcement campaign, using her position to target homeowners she did not like, and inflating violations to justify fines. The reviewer found 23 cases where fines had been applied without documented evidence, including mine. The total refund across the neighborhood was over $30,000. The management company forced the board to issue a neighborhood-wide apology and refund letter. Amy was removed from the design review committee. A recall petition started circulating, and 3 months later, a board election challenge flipped the power dynamic completely. Harold stepped down. Carla became president. A new slate of homeowners who were tired of selective enforcement took over, and the first thing they did was rewrite the design review guidelines to eliminate vague language and subjective standards. Amy tried to fight the recall. She showed up at the annual meeting with a prepared speech and a new set of photos, claiming she had been unfairly targeted and that the audit was biased. But when she stood to speak, the room turned on her. Someone read her boomerang line back to her: "I will bury you in notices until you run out of printer ink." Another homeowner held up a plastic ruler and asked if she wanted to measure their fence too. Amy's smug smile vanished when the room turned on her, and she walked out halfway through the meeting. She never came back. The final showdown happened at the grocery store parking lot nearby. I was loading bags into my car when I saw Amy across the lot, standing next to her sedan with her phone out. She saw me and started walking over, her face set in that familiar sneer. I kept loading bags, calm and unbothered, and when she got close enough, I pulled out my phone and opened the camera. "I have nothing to say to you," I said. "You ruined everything," she hissed. "You turned the whole neighborhood against me." "No," I said. "You did that yourself. I just brought receipts." She tried to grab my phone. I stepped back and kept recording. A couple walking past stopped to watch. Amy realized she had an audience and froze. Then she turned and walked back to her car without another word. Karen storms out when the vote goes against her and everyone sees it, and that was exactly what happened. I sold the house 3 weeks later. The buyers closed without issue, the fence passed final inspection, and the lender never asked another question. My fiancé and I moved to Minneapolis, bought a condo with no HOA, and never looked back. But the story did not end there. 6 months after I moved, I got an email from Donna, the city clerk who had helped me early on. She said the city had received a formal complaint about HOA overreach in Lakeview Crest, triggered by the audit findings. The city attorney reviewed the case and determined that the HOA had been operating outside its authority by imposing fines for violations that contradicted city code. The attorney sent a cease and desist letter to the management company, and the board was forced to revise every enforcement policy to align with municipal standards. Amy left the neighborhood 8 months after the recall. I heard through the grapevine that she moved to a townhouse community in Moorhead, but the HOA there already had a reputation for strict enforcement and no tolerance for rogue board members. She lasted 3 months before filing a complaint against the board and getting voted out of the welcome committee. Some people never learn. The refund checks went out in waves. Mine arrived in the mail on a Tuesday, a check for $4,000 with a cover letter apologizing for the improper charges. I deposited it the same day and used part of it to pay for the wedding. The rest went into savings. A reminder that sometimes standing your ground and bringing receipts is the only way to win against people who think the rules do not apply to them. The plastic ruler became a running joke in the neighborhood. Someone bought a giant novelty ruler and mounted it on the clubhouse wall with a plaque that said, "Measure twice, enforce never." It is still there, as far as I know, a memorial to the HOA tyrant who thought she could make an example out of everyone, and ended up being the example herself. The fence is still standing. The contractor did excellent work, and the new owners told me they love it. The gate latch works perfectly, the posts are level, and the whole thing adds privacy and value to the property. It never was a safety hazard. It never violated the guidelines. It was always just an excuse for Amy to flex power she did not really have, and when I finally played my trump card, a police incident number from a prior HOA trespass attempt that shows a pattern, and brought a second copy for the HOA attorney so the legal risk was obvious, the whole house of cards collapsed. Ed. The HOA dropped the case to avoid a public records mess, and Karen storms out when the vote goes against her and everyone sees it. That is exactly how it played out, beat for beat, and I would not change a thing. I will share another one soon.